New Orleans Saints rookie quarterback Spencer Rattler faces his toughest test of the season so far against a very good Denver Broncos defense alongside a very beat up New Orleans Saints offense. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to dive into the Sean Payton factor for Thursday Night Football. Of course, emotions will run high, but how high will they run? We're going to dive into as well, speaking of run, the Denver Broncos run defense and why it's going to be a problem for the New Orleans Saints that they must figure out a way to circumvent. We're going to kick everything off with Spencer Rattler, New Orleans Saints rookie quarterback who's set to face his toughest test yet. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends at FanDuel. You can make your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So there's no doubt about it. No need to sugarcoat it. No need to call it anything other than what it is. It's the toughest test yet for rookie quarterback Spencer Rattler. And it might be one of the Saints' toughest tests yet as well, going up against a very talented Denver Broncos defense, while the Saints offense is massively beat up. The New Orleans Saints currently without their starting quarterback, potentially going to be without both of their starting wide receivers, are expected to be without their starting center and starting right guard, and of course, two of the guys that are most important to their team and their success on the offensive side, Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara, are each battling a litany of injuries themselves as well. So it's a beat up offense for the New Orleans Saints. I'm not saying that to make an excuse for New Orleans. They got to go out there, they got to play, they got to win, they got to do all that. It doesn't matter that they're hurt, right? Like that's just part of the NFL. You still got to go out there on Thursday. You still got to go out there and play. The Denver Broncos will probably be without Patrick Surtain over on the defensive side. And they just kind of have to deal with that, right? Like there's no concessions made for any of those things. But I highlight that because the Saints are going to be weaker on offense than they have been on offense from a health standpoint. And so that's going to have an impact. And that does make this challenge even more challenging going up against the Denver Broncos defense. And then for Spencer Rattler, it becomes even more challenging as well as the rookie gets his second start of his career. So look, we kind of covered the injuries over on the offensive side. I want to highlight something that General Manager Mickey Loomis said that I kind of disagree with, which is that good organizations don't pay attention to the results or kind of ignore the results. They kind of look at the process. He was kind of talking about injuries and the impact that they've had. Of course, you look at the results. That's why coaches get fired for not winning games. It's why everyone tells you that winning games is the most important part of any competitive sport. It's why every player will tell you that their individual progress, their individual development, or their individual accolades don't matter if the team doesn't win a football game. I had one Saints player tell me in the locker room that it doesn't matter if that player accumulates 200 yards of total offense or intercepts 5 passes in a game, that if the team still loses, none of it matters. So of course, you don't ignore the results. I don't understand that statement, if I'm being honest, but the results are going to matter, because if the result of this Thursday night matchup is that you lose your 5th game in a row, you run into a lot of risk as an organization in terms of where your team is going, what your locker room is going to be like, all of these other things. So for rookie Spencer Rattler, a lot inherently unfairly rest on his shoulders in this game. That's a tall task for any rookie quarterback. So seeing how he responds to this moment, I think, is going to give you a lot of valuable information, because if he goes out there and plays a good game, we are allowed to look at him from an individual standpoint and say, that's a good showing by Spencer Rattler. That means good things for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to their future. But in the present, the result of the game is the thing that's going to carry the biggest impact. So what are some of the things that we're watching in the results or that could impact the results of this game? Well, I want to discuss play calling for a moment because I'm a little bit confused with where the New Orleans Saints are when it comes to their playbook. Klint Kubiak saying before the game on Sunday, when we spoke to him on Thursday last week, that the team doesn't plan to dumb down the playbook for Spencer Rattler or anything like that. However, they got into the game this weekend and they ran motion on just 43% of their game, right? So you consider that. And then you go into this week where Dennis Allen was kind of talking about, yeah, look, you changed the picture for the offense. It changes the picture for the, you change the picture for the defense. It also means that you change the picture for your quarterback. When we're talking about changing pictures, what we mean is the snapshot of what it looks like pre-snap before motion, and then changing the picture, the snapshot of what it looks like after motion. And so you change that for a defense, you're also changing it for the quarterback. So one of the things that Dennis Allen said was, does having a rookie quarterback make that more challenging? It depends on what you're trying to do. I'm paraphrasing, but he kind of asked and answered his own question in that situation. And I thought that was pretty telling that, yeah, okay, that I get that. That infers that implies rather, that in some instances, depending upon the point of the motion, you might not be able to do all the things you want to do with a rookie quarterback. But that kind of goes against the idea that you didn't have to tailor the defense or the offense back or pull the playbook back. Then you compound that with Klint Kubiak on Wednesday of this week, saying that they do feel like they can open the playbook more for Spencer Rattler this week based upon what they did last week. But I thought they weren't holding things back from Spencer Rattler last week. So how much is there really to open up this week? So I'm so interested. I'm so curious about what all of these sort of little inconsistencies about, is the playbook open? Is the playbook not as open? All these other things. Because if you have Spencer Rattler, he says he can run anything in the playbook. So I'm really, really curious to see how much more potentially opens up this week. The Saints ran 12 different plays with designed movement for Spencer Rattler in that game. And I'm curious to see if that means that they're going to do more, if they want him to stand in the pocket more. Designed rollouts. That's the phrase I was looking for. So 12 plays with designed rollouts. That worked well for Spencer Rattler. I'm curious to see if there's more of that, if there's less of that, and they have him in the pocket. I'm very curious to see what it really means to open up the playbook more if the playbook was already open for him. So we'll see where things go there. Klint Kubiak also attributing the lack of motion to them going to more quick counts and things like that. So you don't get the opportunity to run a lot of motion in that because you're trying to get up to the line, create some tempo, things like that, which has its own set of values, especially for a rookie quarterback that's used to an up-tempo offense. I thought that was a good negotiation by Klint Kubiak and the New Orleans Saints offense, but very curious to see what those statements kind of mean going into this game. The Denver Broncos are going to present a challenge to Spencer Rattler by putting him under pressure. Spencer Rattler was under pressure on 35.7% of his dropbacks last week, according to Pro Football Focus. During that time, he completed just 33.3% of his passes and had a 19.8 passer rating. Those are just raw numbers, right? So that's where he was most kind of off of his game, is when he was under pressure. And of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers kind of cranked up the heat on that in the second half. You've heard him talk about that. You've heard Dennis Allen, Klint Kubiak, all kind of talk about that. You even hear Joe Woods talk about like, yeah, that's something that should have been expected, of course, or something that he would do against a rookie quarterback getting their first start, however. So something to watch there is about the pressure that comes. Denver is number 2 in the NFL when it comes to pressure percentage right now, driving pressure at 41% of the time. So they're bringing a lot of pressure, and that's where we saw Spencer Rattler maybe struggle the most last week. So we'll see where things are there. One of the ways that Denver brings pressure is by blitzing. They have the most pressures generated raw number wise by utilizing blitzes. When Spencer Rattler was blitzed last week, 33.3% completion percentage as well, and a 37.7 passer rating. So Spencer Rattler is going to be challenged in this one. He's going to have to get the ball out quickly. He's going to be relying on a lot of other young guys. No Chris Olave expected. No Rashid Shaheed expected. We'll see on those guys. You know, they practice later on today. We'll see if there's any type of surprise movement towards them getting on the field. That would be great for Spencer Rattler. But we're expecting still backup center, backup right guard, and young wide receivers to throw to, all those other things. But I'm very interested to see how Spencer Rattler rises to this occasion and who else comes up in this occasion as well, because a guy like Bub Means, could really end up having a major impact in this game if he's able to help to keep the passing game alive if those top two wide receivers are out, because Denver's run defense is going to be a problem. So they're going to need that wide receiver production or that passing game production. Let me tell you why Denver's defense, though, is going to be a problem in the run game. With that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. It's something that I've used all the time. I mean, when I was looking for work and I was working in theater, we used LinkedIn all the time to kind of see who was hiring, who wasn't, all those other things. And LinkedIn Jobs also helps you on the opposite side of that if you're hiring. Helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other job sites. So if you're not looking at LinkedIn, you're looking at the wrong place. Over on LinkedIn as well, 86% of small businesses, which you may be a small business owner, get a qualified candidate within 24 hours of posting their job. So hire professionals like a professional with LinkedIn. They're making sure that all small businesses who they know are wearing a bunch of hats, so many different hats and all that. They're trying to just make the process easier and quicker for you, including tools to help you write job descriptions, things like that. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. I love Prize Picks. It's super easy. I kind of retired from fantasy football because I got a little bit exhausted with the way that everything goes, especially like injury stuff and everything, kind of having to pivot around all that. Well, the thing that I love about Prize Picks is that they actually give you injury insurance on players that you end up going in on when it comes to picking more or less. And that's really all it is. It's all you got to do. They're going to give you projections for each player in, a football game, a basketball game, a baseball game, whatever it is that you're interested in. And all you have to do is pick more or less than that projection. So for instance, Patrick Mahomes, they'll give you a passing yards amount projection of 267.5 yards. You think he's going to throw for more? Think he's going to throw for less? You pick that, do that for 2 to 6 players. You get 4 right. You went up to 100 times your entry back. It's awesome. Easy to win, easy to play, super, super fun. And it's even better if you haven't tried it before. Now is the time. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, family. Perhaps the most important thing to watch in this game isn't really going to come down to the rookie quarterbacks that are involved, Spencer Rattler and Bo Nix over on the Denver side. The Saints defense is going to try to make things just as complicated for Bo Nix, put him under pressure, all that kind of stuff, as Denver's defense will do for Spencer Rattler. But the biggest difference in this one might end up being the run defense. And Denver's run defense is going to be a problem for Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints. I'll tell you, getting Taysom Hill back would be huge for this team. Let me give you some numbers here to kind of help put this all in perspective for you. So Denver's defense as a whole, number 4 in total yards, number 4 in scoring. So they're a top 5 defense in terms of the overall larger discussed metrics, right? How many points they allow, how many yards they allow, that kind of a thing. But to dive in a little bit deeper into that, they're number 14 in total rushing yards allowed, number 8 in yards per carry allowed, just 4.0 yards. New Orleans Saints have only rushed for 4.0 yards or more in 3 of their 6 games so far this year. The first 2 weeks, as well as Atlanta, when they rushed for exactly 4.0 yards. Outside of that, up against Philly, up against Kansas City, last week against Tampa Bay, under that number, just barely under that number against Tampa Bay, to be fair, for the Saints there. But a lot of that was aided by getting additional rushing yards and additional rushing yard averages on a per carry basis from a mobile quarterback in Spencer Rattler, who had like a 16-yard run at one point, picked up a couple extra yards, things like that. So that ends up kind of feeding into some of that average. So that's a place where you could see the Saints maybe top that 4.0 yard average per carry this week because of what they might get from Spencer Rattler if he continues to get to move, roll out, designed runs, all these other things. And I think more designed runs specifically for Spencer Rattler could go a long way in helping this metric as well, or design runs for Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is interesting in this one. I don't know if he comes back in time for this game. If he does, though, it would be a major benefit for New Orleans, but he was limited on Monday in their estimated practice, where they didn't actually practice, but they put out you got to put out an estimated injury report at least. Yesterday, they did a walkthrough. We did not see him during the portion of practice that was open to media, but he was listed as limited on the injury report. So that's the more important part there. He was listed as limited 2 days in a row after being DNP or having not participated in practice over the course of the past couple of weeks, certainly all of last week. So is there a chance that Taysom Hill is back? Maybe, and that would be big for New Orleans, because the one thing that New Orleans does when they don't have Taysom Hill involved in the football game is that they run outside the tackles. The New Orleans Saints have the second highest outside run rate in the NFL at over 78%. The Denver Broncos defense, however, is allowing the third lowest success rate on outside zone runs for their opponents. So they are very well matched for what it is that the New Orleans Saints are going to want to do in the run game. To take that a step further, remember what it is that kind of stymied the New Orleans Saints run game against Philadelphia? It was those 5 and 6 man fronts when they lined up 5 or 6 on the line of scrimmage. Well, Denver has the league's most 5-man fronts, or putting 5 men on the line of scrimmage, defensive snap percentages in the NFL. They're the team that does that the absolute most, which is really, really important when it comes to this one, because that is the thing that has kind of been the kryptonite for the New Orleans Saints run game. When there's more than 4 guys down in that line of scrimmage, when that box is stacked, all those things, the Saints have had a hard time running the football. And some of that has to do with their weakened interior, as they are, working with, it is now their 4th center of the season. You think Eric McCoy, really their 5th center of the season. They've had 5 players now take center snaps for them. Eric McCoy, Lucas Patrick, the typical starting left guard, had to move over during Philly. They had Shane Lemieux for a game before he went on injured reserve. And then they had Connor McLaughlin end up doing that. And then they had Eric McCoy. So maybe that is only 4. My counting, I think, is off on that. But anyway, 4 guys so far that have played center for them. So they're pretty deep down their depth chart when it comes to that. And remember that Connor McGovern is a guy that they also signed, less than a week before he had to play for New Orleans. So he's getting more kind of comfortable with all of it. So we'll see where things go from there. But definitely something to watch in this one when it comes to all of that. The Saints actually have, I think it's 5 players on their offensive line now that have taken more than 50 snaps. Let me see if I can find that real quick, because that's a pretty big one too. 4 different linemen play at least 50 different snaps at center. That's the one I was trying to think of. That's the most in the NFL so far. So the Saints have had centers that have allowed an 8.2 pressure rate, which 8.2% pressure rate, which is the 5th highest according to Next Gen Stats. And 6 pressures allowed on 69 pass blocking snaps, 8.7%. So actually a little bit higher for Connor McGovern on his own so far, just last week, or in week 5 up against Kansas City. So tough, very, very tough on the interior there. And so that's made things a little bit tough. So why is it that interior pressure is causing issues for the Saints when we're talking about the outside zone run? So the first thing is pressure. We're typically talking about the pass rush, right? So what we're talking about in terms of the impact of pressure up the interior, the issue that the Saints have had there is that is the quickest point A to point B, right? Quickest way to get from one point to the other point is in a straight line. Well, that's the quickest point right there, right up the middle to get to that quarterback. So that's really the big concern there. But when it comes to the run game too, we have to remember that the outside zone run has 3 different lanes, multiple different lanes that you can take. You can bounce to the outside, you can cut back, or you can bang back up the middle. So there's 3 different ways that you're typically looking at going. If you don't win the outside shoulder of the outside edge as an offensive lineman on the outside design run, then typically speaking, the running back's going to bounce back inside or cut back inside to try to go up the middle. And that's where this interior pressure or interior run defense has created some issues for New Orleans. So it just kind of mucks up the second option. In fact, you saw the most successful run that I feel like the Saints had in terms of a traditional run last week was when Alvin Kamara went all the way back against the grain. That might have been Kansas City, I'm thinking of, but he went all the way back against the grain. Yeah, and then Derek Carr, actually helped block on that situation. So he had to actually bounce all the way back and then do this big cutback across the field. You don't want to have to do that pretty often. And in fact, most of the time that's not available to you because of backside defenders, things like that. So that's why this is so important, and why the interior part of the offensive line, rather, is so important, even on outside zone runs. The other thing to keep in mind here is that with the run game taken out, which is what we've seen against Philly, we saw it against Kansas City, we saw it again against Tampa, the Saints offense just doesn't really have that second punch. That's why I mentioned earlier that like Bub Means could be a little bit of a revelation here for the team in terms of giving them a passing game if they can't get their top 2 wide receivers out on the field. That's going to be really important. But it ends up doing a lot of things for you. If you can't run the ball, you can't maintain the ball, you can't maintain time of possession, you might end up falling behind the scoreboard a little bit. So that takes away your ability to use things like play action in the run. If your run game's not percolating as well, that interferes with your play action. If you end up in those trailing positions like we saw the Saints last year on the score, last week on the scoreboard, then they go into straight dropbacks as opposed to play actions and motions and all these other things. So they're just trying to get a play run and all this other stuff. Quick counts, up tempo, that eliminates stuff as well. And so not having that run game has this major ripple effect that kind of changes what your entire offense looks like. Maybe too dramatically so for New Orleans, but maybe by being able to, if they can find a way to run against this Denver defense in a way that they haven't been able to against the tougher run defenses that they've played, that ends up going a long way for them. And then Taysom Hill helps you because he's a guy that you just trust up the middle, no matter how weak your interior is, right? So getting Taysom Hill back would be huge. But this Denver defense is definitely going to be a problem. The other problem for New Orleans is going to be the return of Sean Payton. And I'm not just talking about the players, the coaches, and the organization that'll be on the home sideline. I'm talking about for the fans too. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel still not feeling the Saints in this one. 2.5-point underdog at home going up against the Denver Broncos. Not a massive surprise. The Saints don't think that, FanDuel does not think that this is going to be a high-scoring game between the Saints and Broncos. By the way, the over-under set at just 36.5 on this game. That's the lowest for any New Orleans Saints game so far, probably since week 1. But I even think week 1 was still not inherently, but originally still pretty higher than that. I think it was like in the 38 range or something like that. So Saints and Broncos, people not expecting much scoring, 2 rookie quarterbacks, pair of typically good defenses, typically speaking, and a couple of teams that are going to rely very much on their run games to get started. Yeah, I get it. I understand why they think this is going to be low scoring. So maybe you think that the Saints and Broncos are going to top that, come under that. You think the Saints are going to get the upset in this one. You can find all that over at FanDuel.com. And right now is the right way to do it. And the best time to do it if you're a new customer, because new customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. It's all at FanDuel.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints welcoming back Sean Payton to the Caesar Superdome for the first time since he left the organization. This is going to be a very emotional game for a lot of different people, a lot of different reasons, and you are included in that number. Look, the New Orleans Saints are downplaying very much the return of Sean Payton and everything. They don't want to talk about it. Oh, it's just another game, all these other things. And that's right. Like that's what you want to be doing. You don't want to be out there being like, oh yeah, no, we're so excited for Sean Payton to be back. And you also don't want to go out there and be like, yeah, we don't care. You know what I mean? You don't want to do either of those things. So I understand downplaying it. I don't think it's the wrong thing to do. I think it's the right thing to do. You got to be focused on what's happening on the field, not what's happening across the sideline from another organization, all those other things. So I get that. I'm with that 100%. But I do think that the Sean Payton factor is going to be very much present on Thursday night. It will be there not only for the team, particularly the guys that have played for Sean Payton. You think about Alvin Kamara, you think about Adam Prentice, you think about some of these other guys that have been on this team, that have been coached by Sean, all those other things. Like there's going to be some emotion involved in that. And seeing him on the other sideline, Sean Payton's going to see the visiting locker room. Darren Rizzi joking, like, I don't think he's ever even been in the visiting locker room. He's going to be seeing the stadium from the opposite sideline, which I doubt which he's never seen on game day. All those stuff. So like all that's going to play into this, but I think it's going to play into kind of the fan emotion of it all as well, because I expect very much that there will be some warm reception, some cold reception, right? Some cheers, some boos when it comes to Sean Payton when that team takes the field. There will be boos when the opposing team takes the field, because that's the tradition, right? The opposing team comes out of the locker room, everybody boos, and then you get into the player intros, everybody cheers, and then you're on. And so I expect that you're going to hear like the spattering of applause and everything like that for Sean Payton, because he is the guy that a lot of people credit for changing the city. He's having a major impact on the city. He's the guy that a lot of people credit, and rightfully so, for bringing a Super Bowl to this organization and to this city, all that kind of stuff. Like that's all very much going to be present, and there will be reason to be thankful for that. But I think as the game goes on, I expect to hear less and less positives in the direction of Sean, and more negatives in the direction of Sean when it comes to the audience, regardless of how the game goes, right? Regardless if the Saints are winning or the Broncos are winning, whatever. I think that that's just the way that that's going to go. But I do expect this to be a very emotionally charged matchup. Don't forget, too, that the Saints will also be honoring Drew Brees at halftime in this game for what is going to be his New Orleans Saints Hall of Fame induction. So that's exciting. Jim Duncan over at, Jim Duncan. Jeez. Jeff Duncan. Don't tell him I did that. Jeff Duncan over at, I'm just kidding. I'll tell him myself. But Jeff Duncan over at NOLA.com, pretty great report Wednesday morning, discussing sort of the conflicting nature within the organization around Sean Payton still, right? Like that there was still some resentment to the idea that he left. Apparently, reportedly, some people didn't even want Drew Brees to be honored on the same day that Sean Payton was going to be there. They wanted those two things separate because they didn't necessarily want like the mixing of the happy and negative and all this other stuff. I think that it's great that they're honoring Drew at halftime when the coach that he was with his entire career is there. I think that's a classy move by the organization. I'm all about it. But I also understand the resentment around the idea because, look, some people acknowledge Sean Payton for having helped to bring this organization a Super Bowl, bring this team a Super Bowl, and 16, however many years of really solid football, the best success and best and longest running success that this organization has seen. But there's a lot of people that are also just peeved that he left. And I get that too, because he not stepped away from football as a whole. He stepped away from the New Orleans Saints organization, ended up going to the Denver Broncos. Saints got a, first round draft pick out of it, which is great. But, the story, the exchange kind of ends there. Right. And so I get 100% the animosity that will be felt. I also get the support that will be felt. So I think you're going to see kind of a spattering of all that. And I imagine that that is true for some players as well. There's not a lot of players still around that played under Sean Payton that are a part of the organization still, but like Cam Jordan, we mentioned Alvin Kamara and Adam Prentice earlier. A lot of the same defensive guys are around. Demario Davis, Paulson Adebo, Marshawn Lattimore, Lalonte, like all those players are still very much there. So we'll see. We'll see where it all goes in terms of how it goes. But I think it's going to be a very emotionally charged matchup. And I think that's going to add another level of importance to this game. Like I think the Saints would love to win this one. Would really, really love to win this one. So despite the injuries, despite the challenge of the opposing defense, despite the challenge of the run game that the Denver Broncos will bring, all those other things, and the challenge that comes with a Sean Payton offense, they still want to win this game. There's absolutely no doubt about that for me. I think the New Orleans Saints are absolutely charged to go in and get a W. And at some point, it kind of becomes more about, and I let me say it this way, actually. For some, at some point, right? This isn't universal, but I'm sure that for some, at some point, this will become more about beating Sean Payton than it will be about ending a 4-game losing skid. They're both hand in hand. Don't get me wrong. They're both going to be important. But ending that 4-game losing skid is going to be, and avoiding a 5-game losing streak is going to be very, very important. But I would venture to guess that some people just want to beat Sean Payton. And I get it. I completely get it. But I do think that adds another layer to this game. One last note, because I promised that I would bring it to you. Opponents going up against the Denver Broncos and the number of missed tackles per game. I wanted to bring this to you because we did a study in yesterday's episode, in case you missed it, around the Saints missed tackling versus the NFL as a whole. I cataloged every single team, their number of missed tackles, all that. I also went through and averaged out the number of missed tackles that non-Saints opponents have had against teams that the Saints have played to see if the Saints are missing a disproportionate amount of tackles against that team than their other opponents are. We found that that was true in some cases, not true in others. So here's the number for Denver so you can keep it in mind as we go into this Thursday night matchup. The Denver Broncos opponents so far this season have missed an average of 10.3 tackles up against Denver's offense per game this season. 10.3. So if the Saints come in at 9 missed tackles, if the Saints come in at 11 missed tackles, it's going to tell you the story, right? Are they missing tackles at a disproportionate rate against opponents than what the other opponents of those teams are missing? So that's the number that you're looking for. We can effectively set the over-under of missed tackles for the New Orleans Saints at 10.5. You think it's going to be more? You think it's going to be less, right? So just like Prize Picks, just like FanDuel, however it is that you want to get on it, but we're doing it ourselves. It's the Locked On Sportsbook. 10.5 missed tackles for the New Orleans Saints' entire defense, more or less. Let me know what you think. But that's the number that we're watching when it comes to missed tackles, because that has become such a part of the New Orleans Saints defense in terms of what has worked, what hasn't worked, all these other things, that now it's a stat that we should start paying attention to before a game starts, as opposed to looking back at after a game wins. That's not the greatest sign, but that's where things are right now. 10.5 missed tackles. Will the New Orleans Saints come in at less or more? Let me know what you think. And then we'll revisit Friday morning. Tomorrow morning, you'll get our crossover episode, myself and Sarah Bedinger over at Locked On Broncos. Going to be breaking down this matchup. Sean Payton's new team versus Sean Payton's old team. Bo Nix versus the Saints defense. Spencer Rattler versus the Denver Broncos defense. We're going to break all of it down and let you know what each of these teams needs to do to pull out a win in this Thursday night football matchup. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget for your second listen, go check out Locked On Broncos, see what they're talking about. You can also check out Locked On NFL for everything going on around the world of sports. 2 episodes a day, keeping you up to date on all that NFL news. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.